We're going to review key management in an OpenStack environment on a Windows system, specifically using the Putty and Puttygen tools within the Windows environment to manage SSH keys from the OpenStack environment. Here we have the Horizon user interface, and we've basically just logged into the system. So we're at the overview page in the compute tab. We're going to then look at the access and security pages, specifically the key pairs panel. You're probably on security groups by default. We'll jump to the key pairs panel. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a new key pair. So when we say create a key pair, we can give it a name. So how about default? So we'll use this as our default key and create a key pair. Now it's now created that key pair and actually has automatically downloaded a default.pem file. So we're going to go ahead and save this file, and we can open the folder which is in our downloads folder. So it's a default.pem file. Now again, Putty can't read PEM files, so instead we'll launch this tool called Puttygen, which you can find online. And with Puttygen, we'll then go to load the private key. It turns out Puttygen can read a number of different formats. It's by default looking for PPK files. We're going to say go ahead and look for all files. And it turns out we've already navigated to our downloads directory, which is where our .pem file exists. And we can now load that .pem file. Now that we have the PEM file loaded, a couple things that we have access to. A public key, which is in normal SSH RSA public key format, is available here. We can just copy and paste this. We might want to change the comment, OpenStack default key. That way our default public comment from at least within this Putty generator is meaningful. If we were to then copy this and paste it somewhere else, for example into a GitHub environment, or even use it to upload a private key, a public key, which would be another thing that we could do, we can actually use this format for that information. What we actually want to do though is we want to save a PPK private key, which is what we're really using the Putty key generator for. To do that, you go down here to save the generated key. We're going to leave these two passphrase components empty. We're going to say save private key. Are you sure you want to save this key without a passphrase? Yes, I don't want to save it with a passphrase. And then we can say here, we'll give it a name, default again. We don't have to give it the extension. It's going to add PPK as its extension, and great. So now we can see in the downloads directory, which is where I saved this back to, I have a default.ppk file. This is all great. Now within Putty, I can use this default PPK file. Now I have my default settings that I can load, which has no SSH authentication information stored in it. A private key file would go here. I'm going to go ahead and browse back again into the downloads directory and find my default key. You might probably want to move this somewhere more permanent. And so now I have the path to my default key loaded here. Since I don't necessarily always want to use this key, I might log into other systems with this environment. I'm going to create a new session called default OpenStack. And I'll save that session. So now I have a default OpenStack session and a default settings session. So if I load the default OpenStack session, then my auth key exists. If I go back to sessions and I load the default settings, for example, then my auth key is no longer applied. So now I have the ability to determine, do I want to use a particular key, or do I want to let the system ask me potentially for a password, for example? And I can do that based on the sessions interface. Normally I would put in the public IP address of an instance that I would deploy. We'll leave that to another exercise. But now you can see how you can take a key that OpenStack generates for you and actually use it both for Putty and for the OpenStack side of the equation.